Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the European Food Information Council on facilitating the healthy and sustainable diet shift through effective communication in communities with low socioeconomic status. My name is Betty Chang. I'll be moderating today's session that Katerina Palashka will give. If we can move on to the next slide, I'll introduce you to some housekeeping rules before we begin. So this webinar is recorded, and for the audience, the cameras and your microphones are off, but you are able to post questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you see there are questions that you think other people have posted that are particularly good, you can upvote them, and the ones with the most votes will move to the front of the line, so they will be answered in order of that. And those are not that are not answered during the Q&A session, which is about 15 minutes at the end, we will respond via email. So all your questions will be answered in one way or another sooner or later. Next slide, please. So after the event, you will receive the recording of today's webinar along with the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, and answers to any unanswered questions. And we will also send you a very brief survey where you can give your feedback on what you thought about the webinar. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Katerina Palashka. Dr. Katerina Palashka, who is a Senior Research Manager at EUFIC. She has a Master's in Nutrition and Health from Harukopio University and a PhD in Marketing, Consumer Behavior and Marketing from Wageningen University in Research. So today she will be presenting her research on how to communicate about healthy and sustainable diets to people with low socioeconomic status. Thank you, Katerina.
Yes, thank you very much, Betty, for this introduction. Good morning to everyone, and it's great to see so many of you here today. First of all, please excuse my voice. I'm a bit sick at the moment, but I will try to do my best, and I hope the drugs will also do the work. So today, I will talk about the research we conducted in collaboration with the Caritas Trieste Charitable Foundation to understand what is the best way to communicate to people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged about healthy and sustainable eating as a way of empowering them to make the diet shift. And it seems that this is a very timely topic because I guess all of us know by now that this is it is very crucial to shift towards diets that are both healthier and more environmentally friendly, but at the same time, these diets need to be economically fair for all and culturally acceptable. So these economical and cultural dimensions dynamically enter in the discussion about healthy and sustainable eating. And I think this is what makes our research very relevant. So consumers with low socioeconomic status face a series of unique challenges that limit their uptake of healthy and sustainable eating. As we already know from the literature, healthy food is more expensive than unhealthy food. And if we also consider the rising food prices that we see the last years, I think affordability is really a huge barrier for many consumers nowadays, and especially for those who are more vulnerable. In many parts of the world, consumers with low socioeconomic status also have limited access to places where healthy and sustainable food is sold, or they encounter problems with limited availability of such products, and in turn, the increased availability of unhealthy ones in their food environments. These diet inequalities are further reinforced by a series of health communication inequalities. As consumers with low socioeconomic status are less exposed to health information, they are less likely to seek information themselves, and they have limited trust in source of information. So in this project, we wanted to give consumers with low socioeconomic status a voice, because these groups of people are highly underrepresented in science communication literature. So we wanted to examine their missing perspectives to understand how we should communicate to them effectively, and in this way to empower them to eat more healthily and sustainably. Here you can see an overview of the different steps that we took in this research. So first we conducted focus groups to understand the key barriers and information preferences of consumers with low socioeconomic status. Then, based on the insights we developed a series of tailored communication material, infographics in particular, with information about healthy and sustainable eating. And then we conducted an online survey to test the effectiveness of this material and to validate all their findings from the focus groups. So let's take these steps one by one. Two focus groups were conducted in Trieste, in Italy, by our partners in this project, Caritas Trieste. The first one was conducted with 9 beneficiaries of the Caritas Trieste social supermarket, and the second one with 9 professionals or volunteers of Caritas Trieste. And I will refer to them as professionals from now on, just to make it easier for everyone. And the reason we included professionals here was because we wanted to obtain extra insights into the challenges that beneficiaries face, because of course these people work with them every day and they know them. The sample with beneficiaries consisted mainly of males, and 67% of them were migrants. And if you think about it, these are very convenient proportions, because males and people with cultural background are more underrepresented in research. More than half of the sample were unemployed, or they were not allowed to work due to living status or health issues. And the same proportion also had a low education. Intern professionals were mainly females. Almost half of them were volunteers, and the majority had experience working with both natives and migrants. And most of them also had more than 5 years of experience in their current role. Beneficiaries discussed about how they and their families decide what they eat, what healthy and sustainable eating is to them, how they like to receive information about healthy and sustainable eating, and what are their main barriers and facilitators in getting and using information. Intern professionals discussed the need of informing consumers about this topic, which, according to them, are the most effective ways to deliver information to consumers. And again, the main barriers and facilitators that beneficiaries face in getting and using information. And throughout the discussion, professionals were encouraged to think about potential differences between natives and migrants as a way of taking into account the cultural dimension here. Okay, so let's see what we found then. Of course, budget was the most important determinant of participants' food choice, and this was mainly identified as a limiting factor. So people said that first they have to pay for the basic monthly utilities like rent or bills, and then they see what is left to be spent for food shopping. Also, they mentioned that the limited budget sometimes prevents them from buying certain foods, such as fish, meat, or certain fruits. And other factors that play a role in their food choices were the household composition, so whether there are children in the house or not, having a health condition or dieting for weight loss, the physical or mental state during the day, and in some cases also some external factors. Participants' perceptions about healthy eating varied in scope, I would say. So some people focused on individual foods or nutrients, like eating no or less fat, sugar, salt, eating natural foods or foods that one grows themselves. Other people focused more at the level of dietary patterns. So they talked about variety and moderation in eating. Some thought that healthy eating is not the same for everyone, but it depends on individual factors, like age, for example. And some people seem to have a perceived disconnect between diet and longevity. And perhaps this underscores a perceived disconnect between diet and health. When they were first asked about sustainable eating, they didn't know the term. And when the term was briefly explained to them, they came up with various relevant topics, such as intensive livestock production, animal welfare, use of antibiotics, pesticides, etc. But in all of their discussions, they seem to focus more on what consequences these things have on the quality and safety of the food, or in turn on human health, and not so much on the environmental consequences. And I will come back to that later. A dominant theme when it comes to barriers to being informed about healthy and sustainable eating was the limited trust that consumers have in information and sources of information. Professionals thought that some people are simply not interested in this topic because they have more serious concerns. They are burdened with more serious concerns, which are related, of course, to their financial insecurity. And they also identified several barriers that were relevant for migrants. For example, not speaking the local language, not being familiar with the local culture, being too attached to traditional eating practices, being someone who is difficult to approach, maybe. And finally, they also mentioned that some migrants may be less interested in this topic if they come from places where the discussion about healthy and sustainable eating is not part of the public discourse. The most important barrier to eating healthily and sustainably was, again, the limited budget, but also the psychological burden that goes with the financial insecurity. The limited interest was mentioned here again, but professionals also talk about the limited availability of fresh products in food banks, and in turn, the dominance of packaged or canned products. They talked about the lack of cooking skills or equipment, and especially in people who live alone. They thought that migrants sometimes may refuse certain healthy products if they are culturally unacceptable. And finally, they also mentioned that many times consumers form misperceptions about healthy products from unknown brands. And these are frequently available in food banks. And this is because these products often carry poverty labels. They are packed in unattractive packaging, and as a result, they are perceived of lower quality. And this, of course, leads to lower use. There were conflicting opinions as to whether consumers should trust information from health authorities, and this conflict was evident in the discussions in both beneficiaries and professionals. And it mainly stemmed from the situation with COVID, and the fact that over the last years, more and more people start being skeptic towards the information they receive. Other sources of information mentioned were schools, where, for example, children could gradually pass the information to their families. Health professionals and experts, supermarkets or food labels. And finally, professionals also discuss the potential of delivering information via people who work in food banks, and especially those who have experienced poverty themselves, because consumers with low socioeconomic status could be could perhaps more easily relate to those people. And yeah, these are the most knowledgeable experts, they said. Professionals thought that information should be delivered to consumers mainly with visuals or short snippets of information. There was the idea to present recipes for healthy and sustainable meals, mainly for consumers who don't know how to cook or who have limited access to cooking equipment. And they also mentioned the importance of raising awareness on the problem and the benefits of healthy and sustainable eating, because many people may simply lack interest or motivation. They thought the information should be available in various languages, should be tailored for people who live with poverty and not generic. It should align with the products that are available in food banks. And finally, there were conflicting opinions as to whether the information should be adapted for people with a cultural background. So some said the information needs to be flexible. Others thought, no, we cannot adapt it for everyone. And then some expressed a more nuanced view, I would say, by taking into consideration the acculturation stage of migrants. So to wrap up, consumers with a low socioeconomic status experience not only financial insecurity, but also a huge psychological burden associated with it. And this may lead to limited interest in eating healthily and sustainably, but also to inferior food choice. Because we already know from the literature that poverty and the associated insecurities activate a series of bodily responses that limit our cognitive capacity and lead to inferior choice. At the same time, consumers focus more on issues related to food quality and health impacts, and they pay less attention or they are less aware of environmental impacts. And I don't think that consumers with low socioeconomic status, let's say, care more about themselves and not for others, because there is evidence that low socioeconomic status is associated with higher and more prosocial behavior. So this may be more indicative of this perception of one health, where all the systems are basically interlinked, and imbalances in one system have consequences in the rest. Then, of course, our findings are in line with existing literature in that consumers have limited trust in information and sources of information. And we have identified extra barriers that are particularly relevant for migrant consumers. Our findings also suggest that there are issues with both motivation, skills, and opportunities for healthy and sustainable eating. And so when we communicate to them, we need to address all of these factors. And of course, it became evident that communication should be tailored to this target group, should align with the current food environment, and perhaps should be easy to adapt to various cultural backgrounds and language restrictions. So what we did next, we digested these insights and we tried to apply them in developing a series of infographics with tailored information about healthy and sustainable eating for this target group. We developed in total 8 infographics that could help increase either motivation, skills, or opportunities for healthy and sustainable eating. Excuse me. First, to make sure that everyone knows what healthy and sustainable eating is, we show them general recommendations, such as eating more plant-based foods with specific examples, less animal source foods, swaps they could make, etc. Then we try to tailor the information even more by showing concrete examples of how one can eat healthily and sustainably on a budget. And here we really focused on products that are always available in the social supermarket. Of course, we show them the health benefits of healthy and sustainable eating, such as reduced risk of communicable and non-communicable diseases, as well as environmental benefits, for example, lower use of resources, lower emissions, lower use of antibiotics. And then we also talked about potential food-related risks of climate change, such as higher food prices, decreased food quality and availability, or problems with the supply chain. We also developed flexible recipes for healthy and sustainable eating. And here we provided several alternative options for food products so that people can easily adapt the recipe to their eating preferences. Then, driven by these reported misperceptions about products from unknown brands, we also try to communicate the similarities between products, respectively of brand or package design cues. And then finally, we also presented the benefits of canned or frozen fruits, vegetables, and pulses to encourage people to make more effective use of healthy and sustainable products that are available to them in their current environment. Then we also wanted to address the issue of limited trust in information. And to do so, we manipulated one of the infographics by adding a fictitious quote from a social supermarket beneficiary. And this was done as a way of making the information more relevant to consumers with low socio-economic status, and in this way, increasing the trustworthiness of the information. And this brings me to the last part of this research, the online survey we conducted to test the effectiveness of this communication material. For this study, we recruited participants from 2 social supermarkets in Italy, the one in Trieste and the one in Pordenone, as well as extra participants from an online participant platform, Prolific. Here you see their socio-demographics. I will just mention a few of them. So our sample was fairly balanced in terms of males, females, and education groups. We had less migrant consumers in this study. And while all of the participants had low socioeconomic status, only 43 of them were actually shopping in food banks. So this sample was more generic, I would say. We used a mixed design in presenting the infographics. So basically, all participants evaluated all infographics, and between the 2 versions of the infographic that was experimentally manipulated, they only saw one of them. So either the one with a quote or the one without the quote. We measured willingness to shift towards healthy and sustainable eating behaviors, such as eating more fruits, vegetables, nuts, less red meat, refined grains, etc. And then we combined the information from all these statements into an aggregate score, which was used as a control variable in our analysis. To validate certain findings from the focus groups, we also measured which food groups people cut down the most when the budget is limited, how much they trust various sources of information, which channels they prefer to receive information about food and nutrition, what they think about the availability, range, and quality of fresh products in food banks. And then for migrants, we also assess to what extent the language barrier limits their access to information when they arrive in the new country. And then our key measures for the infographics. So we assessed whether the infographic contains information people do not already know, how useful they find the information, how likely this information will change what they eat or buy. And then depending on whether the infographic whether we thought the infographic taps into motivation, skills, or opportunities for healthy and sustainable eating, we also asked additional questions to see the effects on these dimensions. Finally, participants were asked how trustworthy they find the information in the infographic that was experimentally manipulated. And this was done to assess the effectiveness of the manipulation, so to what extent it increases trustworthiness, and then also to be able to rule out any alternative explanations of the effects of this infographic. We also asked how much people like the infographic in general. Okay, are you curious about the results? I hope so. Let's have a look at them then. An interesting finding was that migrant consumers are significantly less willing than natives to shift towards healthy and sustainable eating behaviors. However, willingness was not significantly associated with other factors like gender, education, employment, living status, household composition, or age. Then the food groups that consumers said that buy less frequently or in smaller quantities when the budget is limited were sugar-sweetened beverages, fish and seafood, sweets, red meat, and then a relatively high percentage of consumers also cuts down on nuts and seeds, while lower percentages cut down on other food groups such as fruits, whole grains, dairy, etc. So to some extent, this is in line with the focus group's findings, where consumers said that they have difficulty buying fish, meat, and fruits because they are expensive. Now, in line with what was mentioned in the focus groups again, the availability of fresh products in food banks seems to be limited because 45% of consumers who shop in food banks said that they find such products only sometimes, rarely, or never. But some good news, consumers seem to be more satisfied with the range and quality of these products because 77% thought the range is at least acceptable and 90% found the quality at least acceptable. Also, language. It seems that it's a real barrier in accessing information for the majority of migrant consumers, because 63 of them said that not speaking the local language when they arrive in the new country at least moderately reduce their access to information about food and nutrition. With regards to trust in source of information, we found that consumers with low education and migrants have significantly lower levels of trust as compared with those who have high education or are natives, respectively. And consumers with low education not only have less trust in source of information, but they were also less likely to know the information we presented in the infographics. And maybe these two findings are interrelated in some way. And if we look at trust in individual sources of information, we found that consumers trust health professionals and authorities more than NGOs, but not significantly more than food labels. As you can see here with the brackets, the orange brackets that are used to indicate which differences are significant. However, when looking at different genders, we see that this pattern is mainly found in males, while in females, the differences between sources are not significant. When it comes to specific channels for receiving information, consumers seem to have greatest preference for the internet compared with social media, the TV, magazines, etc. But this pattern was mainly found in natives, whereas in migrants, the differences in preference of the various channels were not significant. Contrary to our expectations, the use of peer endorsement was not successful in increasing the trustworthiness of information. And also, it didn't have any effect on liking of the infographic or in any other outcome variable that we measured in the study. Now, when looking at the effects of infographics on motivation, skills, and opportunities for healthy and sustainable eating, and I have grouped here the infographics based on the construct that we thought each of them taps into. We would say that overall, they are moderately effective in increasing motivation, skills, and opportunities. However, there were some differences between native and migrant consumers here. So in native, some infographics were found to be significantly more effective than others in increasing motivation and opportunities in particular. Specifically, information on risks of climate change or environmental and health benefits were more motivating than recommendations on how to eat healthily and sustainably on a budget. And then information on benefits of canned or frozen products was thought to open up more opportunities for healthy and sustainable eating than information on similarities between products irrespective of brand. However, in migrant consumers, the differences between infographics were not significant. We see a similar pattern when we look at whether consumers thought the infographics contain information they did not already know. In natives, again, there were differences between infographics, as you can see here with the small letters that are used to indicate significant differences. Maybe I can show this. So these letters here below the names. So if you see that two infographics have the same letter or a letter in common, it means that they do not differ significantly from each other. In migrants, the differences, again, were not significant. And here, the lower the score, the more likely consumers not know the information in the infographic. So you see that natives found the recipe as the one providing more information that is new to them, and to the other extreme, the general recommendation, healthy and sustainable eating, was the one that consumers were most likely to already be aware of. Again, differences between natives and migrants in how excuse me, in how useful they find the various infographics. For migrants, there were no differences, no significant differences between infographics, while in natives, they found the infographics about risks of climate change and health benefits more useful than recommendations on eating healthy and sustainable eating on a budget, but not more useful than the rest of the infographics. If we now look at how likely the information shown in the infographics will change what consumers eat or buy, and this is always as measured with self-reports, of course, we see a common pattern for the whole sample. So there were no significant differences between natives and migrants here. Overall, the infographics were thought to be moderately likely to have an impact on consumer behavior, and some of them were more effective than others. Specifically, we see that food-related risks of climate change was the type of information that consumers found more impactful, let's say, as compared to general recommendations or recommendations on how to eat healthily and sustainably on a budget. And the same was the case for benefits of canned or frozen products. But you can see here again with the small letters which infographics actually differ from each other. So I think in a way our findings confirm and further extend existing findings. And in some cases, I think we have managed to provide some new insights. It became evident that migrant consumers are less willing to make the diet shift compared to natives. And this can, of course, be a result of all those extra barriers that these people have to face, as we identified in the focus groups, but it could also stem from their limited access to information due to the language barrier, as we showed. And whether there is a causal relationship between those factors is still to be investigated. We also showed that consumers tend to cut down on both healthy and unhealthy food when the budget is limited. And if we look at it from the perspective of nutrition, they seem to struggle the most with protein sources, such as fish, meat, and nuts, which of course can an important impact in the adequacy of their diet if the protein that they receive from other sources is also limited. The limited availability of fresh products in food banks can also impact the quality and adequacy of the diet of consumers with low socioeconomic status, unless they have the means and the budget to obtain these products from other places, or unless they switch to alternative formats such as canned or frozen products, if these products are more readily available and accessible by them. And we also provided a more nuanced view on the limited trust to source of information because we found that the source basically makes a difference for males, but not so much for females. Now, as regards communication via infographics, we saw that these are moderately useful and moderately increase consumer motivation, skills, and opportunities for healthy and sustainable eating. And some of them are more effective in doing so than others, but only in native consumers. Also, they seem to be moderately likely to change what consumers eat or buy, and this was irrespective of consumer level of willingness to shift towards healthy and sustainable eating behaviors. This is good, I think. And if we look at types of messages that may be more effective in changing consumer behavior, it seems that although there were only very small differences between the various infographics that we tested, messages about food-related risks of climate change, such as, again, increased food prices, reduced food quality and availability, are more likely to be effective. So perhaps we can say that if we provide consumers with a low socioeconomic status with this more holistic or systems view on the problem, it's more likely to have an impact on them compared to, for example, general recommendations on healthy, sustainable eating. And I think there are several plausible explanations for this effect. So this can perhaps be explained to some extent by the increased focus that consumers have on food quality issues, as we saw in the focus groups, or the problems that they encounter with the food availability. And these factors were in fact addressed in this infographic. But it can also be that they are more interested in socioeconomic consequences of our eating behavior, because I guess this is a very challenging domain for them. And last but not least, there is evidence in the literature that socioeconomically disadvantaged people respond more strongly to negative stimuli. And if you think about it, this was the only infographic that talked about risks or negative consequences, while the rest were more positively framed. And I would like to close this presentation with a set of key evidence-based recommendations on how to communicate about healthy and sustainable eating to consumers with low socioeconomic status, since this was the ultimate aim of this project anyways. So first and foremost, it's important to always factor in the limited budget, and perhaps this is self-evident to some extent, but maybe some ideas to implement this would be to promote specifically affordable foods that are healthy and sustainable, or provide healthy recipes with cheap ingredients. It's also important to give people flexibility because okay, we saw in the focus groups that there were conflicting opinions as to whether the information should be adapted to cultural backgrounds. But we also know from the literature that if people find the message irrelevant, they are less likely to follow up on it. So, and if we also consider the psychological burden and the cognitive overload that is associated with financial insecurity, I think we need to make the healthy and sustainable option a convenient option, and flexibility is important here. Given the limited trust that consumers generally have, it's important to communicate to them via their most trusted sources, and these seem to be health authorities and professionals, especially in males. It's also very important to understand the food environment in which consumers with low socioeconomic status live, and make sure that your recommendations are aligned with the healthy and sustainable products that are available to consumers. Choosing your message carefully, and perhaps how your message is framed, can also make a small difference, but maybe more research is needed to validate this finding. And finally, as it's always the case in science communication, it's important to know what audience you try to reach, because certain segments of consumers, some messages may be more effective than others. And having said that, I also want to emphasize, and this is my last point, that providing information to consumers may help to some extent, but there are also other structural changes that could help facilitate the effects of communication. And this could be, for example, regulation on food prices, increasing the availability of health products, or improving the product and package design of healthy products in order to increase consumer acceptance. And perhaps this is more relevant for products from unknown brands. I want to especially thank Marco Aliotta, Vera Pellegrino, and Andrea Alvera from Caritas Trieste for recruiting participants, conducting the focus groups, and collecting the data for this research, but also all the people from EUFIC who contributed to this project.